The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution with which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination, other than for the purpose of education or information, without the expressed written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media is strictly prohibited. Welcome back to the Nova Society, the space where dialogue deepens understanding and civic responsibility comes to life. I'm Dr. Mark Bound, joined by my partner in crime, Dr. Scott Gershwer, and together we'll unpack the stories that matter most, exploring the headlines and history. The big ideas shaping today's conversations. Let's dive in and hear what our guests and listeners have for us today. So today we are pleased to welcome to the podcast David Zimmer, who is the co-founder of Zimmer, Citrin & Clark. That was founded in 2025. He is a lecturer at Harvard Law School. David represents clients in appeals and complex civil litigation. He has argued merit cases at the U.S. Supreme Court and dozens of appeals in federal and state appellate courts across the country. David is ranked in the Chambers USA in the nationwide appellate rankings, one of Law 360's appellate rising stars in 2021. David's work has also been recognized by the American Lawyer, the Financial Times, and the Legal Aid Society. David dedicates a significant portion of his time to pro bono work and public service with a particular focus on immigration law. He successfully argued two of the most important immigration cases the Supreme Court has decided in the last decade and is one of the few two-time winners of the American Immigration Lawyers Association's Jack Wasserman Memorial Award for Excellence in Litigation. And today, David will be unwrapping some of the confusion regarding immigration law, and we are looking forward to that. Today we welcome David Zimmer. He is an attorney, and he has argued before the Supreme Court with immigration reform, and he's argued before the Supreme Court some cases, and by reading his bio, some very important cases. So we wanted to get his take on, as somebody that's within the system, what he sees and what he might think needs to be done to actually make I would say, a sensible immigration policy. So welcome, David.
Thanks very much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, more than I said. Sure,
yeah. So I'm an attorney. I run a plaintiff side appellate boutique. We're split between Boston and DC. I'm based in Boston. And before that, I was a partner in the Supreme Court and appellate group at Goodwin Procter, which is one of the big law firms, all global law firms. And our group there did a lot of Supreme Court work. And since I was at Goodwin for about a decade, and during that time, I spent about 20% of my time doing pro bono immigration work, mainly representing individuals who had been ordered removed through the agency process and were challenging those orders of removal in federal court, in the federal appeals courts. And so some of those cases, most of those cases obviously get resolved without going to the Supreme Court, but immigration law is very complicated, and often there are disagreements between the appellate courts as to what the immigration law means. And so when you have a case like that, it often ends up at the Supreme Court. And so I argued three of those cases and have also supervised other people who argued two other ones. So really been very closely involved in five immigration cases at the Supreme Court over the last decade or so.
So, I hear you saying that, the immigration laws are very, very complicated. Is that the first step? Make them a little less complicated?
I mean, that would be nice, but I think every immigration reform that's happened so far has tended to make them more complicated rather than less, which I think sort of like the tax code, it's the product of like a series of compromises that just generally add exceptions to exceptions and then cut away, carve outs to the exceptions. And so that's in many ways why it gets kind of more labyrinthine or Byzantine or whatever you want to call it. But it's become a really ironic situation where you have the area of law that honestly I think is one of the more complicated areas of law that we have in the United States, that is often being navigated by people who don't even have a lawyer, because you have no right to I mean, you have the right to hire a lawyer, but you have no right to the funding to get a lawyer in removal proceedings.
So it's not like you have a right to a public defender. You don't have that right.
Exactly, and I think a lot of people don't realize that even though it's obviously a life-changing proceeding, whether or not you get kicked out of the country, it is technically a civil proceeding, not a criminal proceeding, and so you don't have the right to a lawyer. A lot of states, and a lot of, not at the federal level, but a lot of states and cities in recent years have tried to institute some funding and try to create some sort of universal representation. New York is probably the farthest along, and it's made a huge difference. There's a really kind of amazing study that was put together in New York. The late Judge Robert Katzman on the Second Circuit spearheaded this, and I think it showed that you have something like a 500 times better chance of winning if you have a lawyer than if you don't. And I think the implication of that is that a lot of people are getting removed who shouldn't be removed, but don't have the means to defend themselves, basically.
And it's very untransparent to us what is going on with this system, where people are being sent. I mean, thank goodness for cases like the Abrego Garcia case, where you get a little insight into what they're doing to people.
Yeah.
But for the most part, like, we could have neighbors that are like sitting in a prison in Sudan or something like that, and we would never know about it. And it's just crazy. Like here, I teach in Danbury, Connecticut, which is nearby. And the other day there was an ICE raid in Danbury, and people are outraged. I mean, they're posting on Facebook, yelling insults at these guys, and they're dragging people out. In some cases, they're going to the courthouse. And I mean, if somebody is at the courthouse, they're obviously trying to do this the quote unquote right way, and yet they're being dragged out by ICE agents, but who are more or less seeking to fulfill a quota.
Yeah, I mean, what's happening now is that you've taken a system that has always been heavily, with a huge weight on the scale against non-citizens and in the government's favor in the best of times, and you've got an administration that is basically looking for every loophole that they can to make it even more that way. And sometimes the loopholes aren't even there. They're just making up loopholes that don't really exist in the law, and sort of counting on the fact that there's nothing, that it's very hard to challenge them for undertaking illegal conduct. I mean, I'll give you a good example of how this sort of plays out, and we're trying to do something about this with some other organizations. But the Fourth Amendment says that the police, and that includes ICE, can't just stop people for no reason on the street, or can't stop people because of their race or the language they're speaking. You have to have probable cause to think that they did something wrong. In the context of ICE, that means they have to have some reason to think that the person they're arresting is in the country illegally. And they're pretty flagrantly violating this every day. They're just, in a lot of these raids, maybe there's one person who they know they're looking for, who they have reason to think is in the country illegally, but then they'll just arrest the whole family and kind of figure out later what's going on. That's a blatant Fourth Amendment violation, but there's actually not much you can do about it, because normally the remedy in a criminal context is that any evidence, the main reason the police don't do this all the time, in addition to many police officers and government agencies wanting to follow the law, but sort of even aside from that, is that if you recover any evidence that can't be used in a criminal, it'll be suppressed by the court. They can't use it to prove guilt. That doesn't apply in immigration proceedings. So there's very little that can be done, actually, if ICE does violate the Fourth Amendment. And so, there are certain things that some organizations are trying to do, and we're sort of working with some of them to bring Federal Tort Claims Act suits against the officers, but that can be an uphill battle in various ways too. And so, what I think is really different now than at any time I've practiced is you have an administration that's taking a system that, again, is already weighed in the government's favor and trying to find every way to take advantage of both legal loopholes and also ways in which they can do illegal things without really any remedy being available. And that's what I think has made this also so frightening. I mean, the third country removal is another great example of that, where everyone's always kind of known that there is this weird, I've encountered it in a couple like one-off cases before Trump, that there is this weird provision in the immigration law that I found surprising the first time I read it, that if the government can't remove you to the place where you are a citizen, they are actually allowed to remove you to other countries. Like it is in the immigration law, obviously or I would think there would be constitutional limits on that, but the government has generally not done that because it's such a kind of cruel thing to do, right? To just take somebody and dump them in a random place. But obviously that's, now cruelty is almost the whole point, because a lot of it is deterrence and trying to get people to leave and trying to get people not to come. So it's a very different world.
I think you bring up a very good point that so many people here do not understand. We understand the concept that if you're a citizen, you have certain rights, but where there are also certain rights somebody has just for being in the United States. I have to admit, being surprised that they are not offered an attorney, that is not a requirement. I have a master's in law, and I didn't study immigration.
Yeah.
So it was like, I did not realize that. So this is a great time to educate some of our listeners, and that is, can you give us a quick rundown of what are the rights we think immigrants have that they actually do not?
Yeah. And to be clear, the reason they don't have the right to an attorney is not that they're immigrants. It's that removal proceedings are not criminal. So it's not that the right to counsel, like if a non-citizen, if someone who's here illegally was charged with a crime, they would have a right to an attorney in the criminal proceeding. The issue is that
it a misdemeanor, David?
Well, if they were charged with illegal reentry in criminal court, then they would have the right to an attorney. The issue is that a removal proceeding is a civil proceeding where the government is trying to say you have no right to be in this country, and we're not trying to punish you for doing anything wrong. We're just trying to obtain the civil remedy, undo the wrong, and have you leave, basically. And so the proceeding is not to inflict punishment. This is the legal theory behind it. It is that it's trying to the proceeding is trying to determine whether you actually have a right to remain here, and if you do, then you can stay, and if you don't, then they put you on a plane. Either you agree to leave voluntarily, or they'll put you on a plane and you'll leave. So in that context, where it's in the same way that if you got sued, right, by the government or anyone else in a civil lawsuit, you don't have the right to an attorney to defend yourself. You have the right to hire an attorney, but you're not you have the right to bring an attorney with you, but you have no right to the government won't pay for the attorney.
So you mentioned cruelty, and one of my students who was kind of falling behind, I had to sit down with him and I asked him, I said, look, you were doing really well, and now you're missing a lot of classes and you're not doing your work and you're coming in clearly unprepared. Can you tell me what's going on? And he said that he's legal. He was born here. His mother is legal. She's been naturalized, but his father is not yet. He's in the proceedings, but he's not there yet. And he said, every morning my father leaves for work. He's a house painter. And I don't know if I'm ever going to see him again. And I'm like, no child should have to go through that. This is an 18-year-old boy who's living in terror that he's never going to see his father again. And it just seems, this is not a legal thing, obviously. I have no legal. This is just a humanitarian sort of ethical, maybe, idea that we ought not to commit atrocities or intimidate small children or young, even teenagers. And it's incredible to me. And that the same guy, Tom Homan, who was Barack Obama's, on his border patrol, is now, following, I guess he's just following orders. And his approach is completely different than the way it was before.
Yeah. I think that it's that. We have this. A lot of the cases that I've dealt with, you have these issues where people have been in the country illegally for a really long time, and I think it's one of the weird things about the way our immigration system has evolved, right? Which is that there was a time like when my family came, which was my family all came in various parts of the late 19th century, but mainly the first half of the 20th century. They were Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, and you basically just showed up, right? Like it was before the Immigration and Nationality Act, and the country's growth really depended on these waves of Italian and Irish and Jewish, other Eastern European, Chinese immigration more on the West Coast, but there really weren't. I mean, actually, there were laws about the Chinese immigrants, which were which were awful. But for the most part, the people coming from Europe, you basically just showed up, and the problem is now that the country still depends on these waves of immigration, as we're experiencing now, right? Still depends on these waves of immigrants for work, but doesn't provide the path for enough people to come legally. And so the result is sort of inevitable, right? Especially with the southern border being what it is, that you get millions of people just coming into the country. And there's not a ton of incentive to, at least prior to this administration, there hadn't been a ton of incentive to really enforce the laws in some way. But it results in the situation where a lot of my clients, you meet these people where they are here illegally, right? They entered illegally, and no one ever really did anything about it. But then in the meantime, they got married and they had kids and they have jobs. And it's sort of like, what are you supposed to do about that, right? What we should do is just allow people to come in legally in the first place, right? But given that we're not doing that, it does create this weird situation where it seems a bit like there are laws that that everybody knew about. I mean, and this doesn't apply to like the dreamers. It doesn't apply to kids, but a lot of people came as adults. They knew they were violating U.S. immigration law, and it's sort of like, I don't know. It's a really hard situation because, I mean, look, what they're doing now is taking it to an extreme. But Obama, prior to this administration, I think it was the Obama administration that deported more people than any administration in the history of the country. And was that bad? I mean, it certainly led to the breakup of a lot of families, but they were predominantly targeting people who clearly had no right to be here. And I mean, it's kind of cruel in many ways for the reasons you're saying, Scott. And it's especially cruel to their kids. I think, like, in many ways, those are the people who are born here, and their parents, it's not their fault that their parents came illegally. And
yeah, I had another student who hasn't seen her mother in 9 years.
Yeah.
Because she lives in Brazil, because she's not a citizen, but the rest of them are. And she's got siblings that she takes care of. And they're looking forward. Hopefully, they were saying that hopefully this summer they would get a chance to go down there and see her. It's just crazy. I mean, we could be a little bit more flexible on this, and it's hard not to see the racist or anti sort of ethnic component to it. There's an office of remigration, and I was looking into this idea of remigration. There's actually at the State Department an office of remigration. It's essentially ethnic cleansing. We're ethnically cleansing America.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a difference, David, and we get this a lot from our listeners about people coming to seek asylum,
mm-hmm.
and then people that enter illegally not seeking asylum. And there's a lot of confusion, because if you listen to the talking heads on television, you get all sorts of different things that, this is what you do, this is what you don't do.
Yeah.
So it's my understanding that if you seek asylum, and this has been reported, I don't know if it's true, so I'm going to ask. If you're seeking asylum, you have to be in the country to seek asylum. Is that not true?
To file an application for asylum, you have to be in the United States. That's right.
Then what happens all right, so I'm seeking asylum from, I don't know, Canada. So I come over here and I seek asylum. I have to now go back to the place I'm seeking asylum from? Or can I stay?
No. I mean, there was, during the first Trump administration, there was this whole issue with in general, I mean, in general, you can stay. That's sort of the whole premise of asylum, because it would obviously defeat the point if you're
having to go back and wait.
Yeah. And so one of the things, one of the many screwed up things with the immigration system is that often what happens is people come, They apply for asylum. If you apply for asylum, you're allowed to stay in the country, and you even get work authorization while the application is pending. But because the system's so backlogged, you can be waiting for years and years to get your application heard. And during that time, people meet people, they get married, they have and then your application gets denied, right? And then it sort of feels like, oh well, it's just cruelty to deport this person now. But which it is. I don't actually disagree with that. But it's sort of like it's I think that's where a lot of this happens, right? And I think also the requirements for asylum can be complicated, especially in the context of gang-related claims. Right, a lot of people coming from Central America are bringing claims where the sort of persecution they're challenging is not directly inflicted by the government; it's being inflicted by gangs that have and if that is truly independent of the government, that is not a valid claim for asylum, right? It has to be persecution by the government, or that the government is unable to stop, basically, or it's not just unable, but not even trying to stop, or where the gang is affiliated with the government, and that's complicated as to exactly what's going on in a lot of these countries. And so, asylum law, like all of immigration law, is a mess. Like it's very complicated, and it's not intuitive. You can have people who have gone through horrible things, but it's not the right kind of horrible thing to qualify for asylum. And again, it's very different than pre World War II, or just post World War II, when there was sort of an acknowledgement that, if you look at what it says on the Statue of Liberty, right? Asylum law is not give me your whatever. I'm not gonna get it right, but
I actually think that came up this weekend when somebody in the Trump administration suggested that it might be time to take down the Statue of Liberty.
Oh God, yeah. Well, they're certainly not. It certainly doesn't comport with their view of how the immigration system should work.
And is it true that you can't cross another country, so that somebody from El Salvador can't go through Mexico to claim asylum in the United States?
Well, that's so. As of now, you can, but the Trump. One of the things that I'm honestly not totally up to date on exactly where things stand with that. But one of the things the Trump administration has tried to do is to say you have to at least. I'm not sure I'm getting this exactly right, but basically, if you go through Mexico, you have to at least try to get asylum in Mexico, or explain why you couldn't get asylum in Mexico if you're going to try to claim it in the United States. But that's not like a locked-in rule. Obviously, like most people who are coming from Central America and applying for asylum are coming through Mexico, and many of those people have gotten asylum historically. But that's certainly been one of the many ways this administration has been, both the first time and this time, has been trying to cut back.
So it really seems like that the laws are there. They're complicated, way more complicated than they should be. Probably it's time for a revamp and actually look at, because we are not in post-World War II anymore. The population of the world is much larger. Our population is much larger. The infrastructure, by what I'm hearing, and I think we talked about this before, is not there to support this. I mean, we're talking about a case that could take 10 years.
Yeah.
Murder cases don't take that long in some cases.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, to be clear, that the cases don't take very long. It's like waiting for the case to get heard.
Right.
Yeah.
So is that a lack of judges, or what is that a lack of that makes it so backed up?
Yeah, it's a lack of judges.
Or is it bureaucrats?
It's a deliberate lack of judges.
Well, now it's a deliberate lack of judges. I think, this administration is both trying to deport more people and firing the judges, because they don't actually want the cases to be heard, right? And they just want people to go. And it's a very calculated. They're also making it historically, while you were in removal proceedings, unless there was some reason to think you posed a danger or a flight risk, you weren't held in detention. And now this is very heavily contested right now. but the administration's taken the position that anyone who entered, this wouldn't necessarily apply to some people, some asylum applicants, but for the most part, people who entered illegally, who are arrested not immediately at the border, have to be held in detention. So that's like most people who don't have status, the government's taking the position those people have to be detained. And why are they doing that? Because they want people to leave. They don't want people to fight the detention, right? They want them to get detained and say, well, I don't want to sit in jail for however long. I'll just leave. And we have a client. Once you get to the Court of Appeals stage, you can actually leave and still continue to fight your case, but you have to go all the way through the agency proceeding first. And I think a lot of people just give up because these immigration detention facilities are awful, which is another part of the strategy, right? That they're but yeah, reform. Look, I think the system is in desperate need of reform. But of course, if you ask people on different sides of the aisle in which way it needs to be reformed, they're going to tell you like very different things.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, I think, yeah, go ahead.
There was an article in the Atlantic in 2022, so Joe Biden was president, about the difference between Afghani refugees and Ukrainian refugees. And it seemed to be very clear that Americans in general, but certainly the administration, was more open to bringing in 100,000 Ukrainian refugees rather than 40,000 Afghan refugees. And it seems to me to be an ethnic or a European versus Asian bias. I just read yesterday that white South Africaners can now again come in, that there's that the quota has been increased by something like 10,000 to encourage white South Africans to come in. And whereas other groups in other countries who are clamoring to get here cannot. At what point, like, does the Constitution say anything about, that we're only bringing in Europeans? We're not interested in people of color.
Yeah. So there were.
By the way, your family and my family both came from the same place, probably in the Pale of Settlement way back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Would they have been considered white back then or now?
Yeah,
they were back then.
Yeah, surely not. Even Italians weren't considered white back then, But so there were actually lawsuits about exactly that, about the Afghan Ukraine, the difference in the way those communities were treated in what were pretty comparable situations. Yeah, in some ways, what's happened with some of the Afghan refugees who were fleeing because they had assisted the U.S. military when the U.S. military was there is outrageous. That's a whole other story. These people have risked their lives to support our military, and we're basically treating them like just giving them, basically letting them die. But there were lawsuits about that, and I think there does come a point where these policies can be to run into kind of equal protection type violations.
Okay.
It's complicated though, because people outside the United States obviously don't have any constitutional rights at all, really. People who are not only not citizens, but also aren't here. And so the cases end up getting litigated sort of based on the rights of family members who are here, or it can be complicated to make those claims. And also the federal government and the executive branch has a ton of leeway in sort of making foreign policy judgments about, you're very rarely going to get, this administration maybe comes as close as you're ever going to get, but to like certainly under the Biden administration, you're not going to find a smoking gun that says, "Let's let the white people in," right? And now you kind of have the president almost saying that explicitly, but that's obviously very unusual, and I think it often is more complicated, right? I think I'm totally speculating, but I suspect some of it with the Biden administration was a sense of like they were in a very fraught political climate. The idea that they might make a mistake and let one person in they shouldn't have, who, God forbid, did something terrible, like they're dead politically, right? And I think there was probably just a lot of political fear around that. Whether that was like actually like a legitimate concern, I have absolutely no idea. It probably wasn't really, but I think. But I think these claims about basically the rights of people outside the United States are very hard to bring, just because they don't really have rights.
Yeah, I get that. But once they're here, they're persons, right? And that's
correct. Yeah. So, I mean, there are very few rights that people within the United States, that are not available to people here, whether if they're not citizens. But for policies that are governing rules about what number of people from different countries can come, that starts to become much harder to challenge.
I had a student ask me this, and it was an interesting question. She said, the United States is actually a bunch of sovereign states come together in a republic. Can a state create its own immigration policy, say like California, say like these sanctuary cities and things? Can a state, being sovereign, create their own immigration policies?
Yeah, I mean, this is an issue that gets litigated in opposite directions.
I'm sure.
In every administration, right? So, I mean, the short answer is no, right? Immigration is probably the one area that is most controlled by the federal government, right? So there's a famous Supreme Court case where, usually when states try to do things like impose their own, and it cuts both ways, impose their own criminal penalties on being like in the country illegally, right? Some states have tried to say it is a violation of, I think Iowa was one of the states. It is a violation of Iowa law to be in the state of Iowa without legal status to be in the country. And those statutes consistently get struck down and say, no, like that sort of thing is within the purview of the federal government. Where it gets complicated and where the sanctuary city stuff comes up is the federal government, under something known as the anti-commandeering principle, and there's sort of various similar things. The federal government can't force the states and local governments to basically enforce federal law. So they can't commandeer the state police. So when a city like Boston or New York says, our police officers will not cooperate with ICE in enforcing the federal immigration laws, this administration has tried to challenge those rules, but I think those rules are pretty standard fare as to what states can say, is that these are our police officers, we're paying them, and we don't want them enforcing immigration laws, and you, the federal government, can't force them. Like, they can't obstruct, right? They're not allowed to obstruct the federal government in enforcing immigration law, but they don't need to spend their resources
or cooperate freely.
Cooperate freely, right? Now, there are a lot of blurred lines, right? So there are a couple of cases right now. There's a case that I'm very familiar with because I worked on this issue during the first Trump administration about when and whether ICE can basically arrest people who are showing up to state courthouses, because these are state institutions. The states, if people fear being arrested by ICE when they show up in state courthouses, they don't come, right? And they don't come to their criminal hearings. They're women who are being subjected to domestic violence are scared to come and testify against their partners. I mean, you actually often will have partners who take advantage of this, and abusive partners, and say, if you call the police, like, you're gonna, ICE is gonna come get you, basically. And so some states have tried to say, and again, this is New York. There's a case in the Second Circuit about this right now. ICE isn't allowed, not just ICE, but no one can conduct civil arrests in New York state courts. which was a long-standing rule. Like there used to be a lot more. There aren't very many contexts in which you can be civilly arrested anymore. In fact, there are almost none. But that actually used to be a very common thing. If you were bankrupt, like the creditor could actually have you arrested. I mean, we're going back like a long, long time. But
debtor's prison.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there used to be rules that said you can't conduct those kinds of civil arrests in courthouses, and so they tried to bring those back and say those apply to ICE too. These are civil arrests; they're not criminal for the reasons we were talking about before. And the federal government's trying to push back on that, and so this question of like what exactly states and cities can do around immigration is sort of hotly contested. But it is very clear, for instance, that California cannot say, well, I don't care whether the federal government wants you in the country. You are welcome in the state of California, and we therefore grant you legal status to be in California, even if you couldn't cross into Nevada or Oregon. That they clearly cannot do. And on the flip side, the states also can't create their own enforcement mechanisms of saying it is a crime under, like I was saying before, under Iowa law to be here without
punishment, and punishment's execution or something. I mean, just
exactly.
to take it to that, the nth degree. Yeah, absolutely. So you've got people, though, and you hear about it all the time. They are in the system. They are doing everything that they're supposed to do to become citizens. They're still in the country illegally.
Yeah.
So my first question is, and this comes up a lot, how did they get in the system in the first place if the government already knows you're here illegally, you're not going anywhere? How did they get into the system and progress through the system to begin with? And then the second question is those people that are in the system and are doing what they're supposed to, showing up, where is the incentive to get into the system if you could be arrested at, say, an immigrant, a check-in?
Right. Well, I mean, so the short answer is there are a lot of ways, right? So I mean, I'll just give you an example, right? If you enter the country illegally and then you marry a U.S. citizen, you could apply for adjustment of status to a green card holder. This is something the administration, one of their more recent announcements where they're trying to cut back on your ability to do this without leaving the country. But historically, for the most part, if you don't have any criminal convictions or anything, if you're here illegally, and the government probably at that point doesn't know that you're here at all, but you marry a U.S. citizen, you can apply for something called adjustment of status and say, look, my status right now is that I'm here without authorization, but I now have the right to get a green card through my marriage, right? But at that point, you don't. By filing that application, you do not become legal. Like you have to get it granted. And so in theory, and this is what this administration is sometimes trying to do, the government will say, well, that's nice. Now we're going to start removal proceedings against you because you're here illegally. And traditionally, the immigration court would say, well, hold on, let's let this application. The application goes to USCIS. Which is separate from the immigration court system. It's the not removal. It's where you're applying for good things to happen, basically, as opposed to the government trying to kick you out. And traditionally, the immigration court would kind of say, well, let's just put this removal proceeding on hold until we see what happens. They don't have to do that, though. But even then, they might say, but you have to have these check-ins, right? And at some point, maybe you have a criminal charge or something where the government might say, actually, you know what? We're going to go forward with this removal proceeding. So but there are a lot of ways where you could get kind of in the system, as you put it, just through either applying for some sort of relief, or let's say you do get arrested and put in removal proceedings, but your proceedings are stayed. That there's something called either in the same way that in the criminal context, there's prosecutorial discretion. I mean, sure. The DHS is free to say, you know what, we found you, but and under Biden and Obama, you could get this. You would write a letter to DHS that said, look, here's who I am. I've been here for a long time. I have these kids. Maybe I'm not entitled to any form of relief, but do you really want to, or I think I would be entitled to relief, but do you really want to go forward with this? Or, I'm a good person. And at that point they might say, okay, fine. Well, let's put the removal proceedings on hold. You'll check in with ICE every year, but as long as you don't do anything wrong, we'll
Right.
put the removal proceedings on hold. That doesn't give you any status, but it just sort of means they kind of not really look the other way, because they know about you now, but
Right.
they're kind of exercising their discretion not to go forward with it. So
Yep.
there are a lot of ways you can kind of. Now, none of that's happening now. Right now, it's like,
Right.
pedal to the floor, like anyone we could order removed. Even some people we probably shouldn't have removed, like we're going for it. But that wasn't traditionally how it
Yeah. Because
played
I'm
out.
thinking about Scott's student,
Yeah.
the father. You're
Right.
married. I mean, back in the day, after World War II, if a U.S. soldier married a British girl and came back home, pretty much everybody was let in, and there wasn't this big issue. And these are things that just seem to be going on for years. They're still married. I mean,
Yeah.
none of that has changed.
I mean, that's still generally the case, right? I mean, that's always a very good position to be in, to be married to a U.S. citizen. But there can be criminal issues that can get in the way. I mean, we haven't even talked about the interaction between immigration law and the state criminal justice system. That there are, if you have like any kind of drug conviction, even something pretty trivial, that can derail the whole thing. So that's often a reason why people don't want to apply. And even if you're married, so there are a lot of people where you're married to a U.S. citizen, but there's something that makes you nervous, because the problem with applying for adjustment of status is that you do put yourself on the government's radar, right? And so,
Right.
like, there is always a chance that not only will your application for adjustment of status be denied, but you will be put in removal proceedings and removed. And so people can be wary of applying if they don't think that they're like basically guaranteed to get it. The other thing that can happen, and now Trump is basically, well, they've sort of backed off of this a little bit, but they've said, the normal way that you would apply if you marry a U.S. citizen in the situation you're describing, Mark, is the spouse would go to the consulate or the embassy abroad. You'd apply basically for citizenship abroad, and you'd say, I have the right to a green card because my partner, my spouse is a citizen, and we want to move to the United States. And that's normally, again, criminal issues aside, like a pretty standard process, but it can take some time. And during that time, you're not in the country. And what Trump has tried to say, they tried to issue this guidance, I forget if it was guidance or rulemaking, but is to say, like, we're basically not going to do adjustment of status for the most part anymore. Even if you're here, if you want to apply for a green card based on marriage, go home, submit your application, and, hopefully we'll grant it. But there are a lot of reasons that that's like a very scary thing to do, even in the best of times. Like especially if there are kids involved, you can be separated from your family for a long time. You have almost no recourse if your application is denied. Whereas if an adjustment of status application is denied, you can. I mean, it can be tricky, but you can challenge it in court. So it's a very big deal to have to go through what's known as the consular process abroad, as opposed to adjustment of status in the U.S.
Especially since it seems like a clever ruse, because like 75 countries, I think the consulates are not issuing visas to anybody.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
all they want is people to leave, right? And they're not going to let people back in. I mean, they're not letting anyone in. I mean, they didn't even let. I don't know. I didn't read the article, but I saw that I think one of the people who was supposed to referee the World Cup, who was from Somalia, they didn't let him in. Yeah.
Although there's a new wrinkle there, because anybody from Africa probably has Ebola, they're saying, and we're not.
Oh, is that what their explanation is in the whole continent?
That's another complication.
Yeah.
That they're definitely taking advantage of. But as you said, like going back to Cuba, I think Cuba and Afghanistan are like 40% of the adjustments are for those two countries. And can you like imagine you've gotten out of Cuba, you've come here, and now you gotta go back? Forget about Afghanistan; that would be just off the table altogether. You'd rather just go to Canada or something like that. You're not. I don't think you're going back to the Taliban-run Afghanistan to apply for legal status in the United States of America.
Yeah.
Again, it seems like cruelty is the point, and And the fact that Trump just switches sides in wars and things like that,
Yeah.
does complicates matters. I mean, Israelis might find themselves on the wrong side of Trump pretty soon if Bibi keeps denying him, and Israelis seeking to get into the United States of America might have some trouble.
Yeah.
So if you were going to make a change, David, would you start with the law or would you start with the system? Because everything I'm hearing that we've talked about today, which has been fascinating, absolutely fascinating, says to me that each administration can interpret how it's going to enforce however it wants, because the law basically gives them that leeway. So if we increase the system, I mean the logistics, we had more judges, we had all this, that would still be the case. Is this something where we've got to either tighten the law first before we can do anything else, and actually make a decision as to what the true policy is going to be, so that it can't be manipulated by the next guy or woman that's in the White House for 4 years? Because it just seems to be constantly, when you were talking about Italians, and the other thing about Italians back in the day was it wasn't only being Italian, it was being Catholic.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, as a Catholic, it was this huge thing. You were Catholic, and now we're looking at now you got Muslims, you got Jews, you got Catholics, you got all this, and now the Pope's on the outs. How can you not like the Pope? I mean, come on.
From Chicago.
How can you not like the guy, other than the fact that he likes the White Sox? But the fact that, I mean, it just seems that it's got so much wiggle room here that it goes by the whim of whoever the administration is. And I don't think the law is supposed to be that.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard because there's always, the immigration statute is written with a lot of executive discretion in it. And I think to some extent that's unavoidable, in the sense that how do you decide, right? You don't want to have it be a situation where there's the war in Ukraine or there's Afghanistan and you have to go to Congress in order to decide, like, should we let these people in, right? And so that's what the whole parole system is. But then, I mean, the parole system has been a huge fight in a whole host of ways. Both ways. Like at the end of his administration, Biden tried to create parole for basically all parents of U.S. citizens. It wasn't quite that extreme. I forget exactly what the contours of it was, but it was sort of, and I think it's hard to have a system that doesn't have some discretion built into it. I think until, in fairness, both of the last two administrations, or I guess three if you count the Trump as two different administrations, prior to Trump 1, I don't think there was a ton. I mean, obviously there was some variation between Republican and Democratic administrations, but like the basic contours of the way the immigration laws were enforced didn't change that much administration to administration. There were obviously differences. I mean, it's like a lot of things in our political system right now, and in the last, whatever it is, 12, well, not quite 12, 10 years, it's been the opposite, where it's just gone all over, where Trump, I feel like, was trying to do, was trying to cut everything back as much as possible. But in fairness, Biden did some things that, I mean, he was pretty aggressive the other way with some of the ways that he read some of these laws. I obviously have tend to be more sympathetic to that, but in terms of like the use of discretion, of like discretionary provisions to achieve pretty dramatic ends, like there was some pretty aggressive readings. Again, I think a lot of what he did was totally justified. I think that there are, like, that the system itself, it's hard to separate the two things, right? Because
Right.
like in many ways, like I don't think it is possible to write an immigration law that will create kind of like a robotic output as to what should happen in every given situation. I think the world and the system are just too complicated for that. I think if you hired the right number of immigration judges, made them independent, had the right number of people in the appellate immigration body, made them independent, and had it so that when people's cases were actually processed as they arose, that actually would, would make a huge difference on how the system and people were given lawyers.
Yeah, that'd be
Then
helpful.
I think that would actually make a huge difference in how things are run and take a lot of the chaos out of it.
Maybe AI could help.
That maybe, I don't know. But maybe, I don't know. I mean, the problem is, like, we have, again, there are so many things we haven't even talked about, but right. I mean, Trump has just been systematically firing all of the immigration judges and board members who ever rule against the government. And so the agency has just become a joke, honestly. Like, and I mean, I have friends who have left. There were supposed to be removal protections against immigration judges, that they shouldn't be able to get fired like this. The executive has taken the position that violates Article 2 of the Constitution, that the president should be able to fire whoever he wants at that level. And that's now going up to the
So that really brings up a pretty good question. Why is immigration judges, we're talking judges and appellate groups, why are they not under the judiciary? Why are they under the executive?
That's a good question. It's probably goes beyond. I mean, so when the administrative state was sort of set up, going back to kind of like the New Deal era, you had all of these civil adjudicated. You had all these civil systems that needed to figure out how to resolve disputes, right? So you claim you're entitled to more Social Security. You veterans benefits. You think you're not getting the right benefits. And so all of these agencies have these administrative judges who are basically resolving disputes at the agency level. All of that stuff you can ultimately challenge, or the vast majority of it, you can ultimately challenge somehow in federal court. But basically all of these federal agencies have some sort of system for resolving disputes within them. Now, these immigration judges, it's a bit of a misnomer in the sense that, I mean, they're not like federal. They are federal. They're not Article 3 judges, right? So there's Article 3 of the Constitution, which is what we think of as federal judges, district court judges, court of appeals judges, Supreme Court judges, who have all these lifetime tenure. They can't be fired. They can only be impeached. It's what you think of as judges. Immigration judges are not that. These are people who work for the Department of Justice.
Do they have to be lawyers?
I think as a practical matter, they do. I don't know whether the statute says that, but certainly I'm not aware of anyone who has been hired as not being a lawyer. But the thing about all those decisions all of that is basically delegated authority of the Attorney General. So the Attorney General can basically override any of these decisions. And historically, I think, although there was certainly some difference, there had been a real effort to have immigration judges have independence. That there is a distinction in the sense that the people who are prosecuting removal cases are attorneys within the Department of Homeland Security. And then the judges are on the Department of Justice side, and an office called the Executive Office of Immigration Review. And so there was an attempt to separate things out in that way to make it less where like literally the judge and prosecutor like report to the same person. And I think that, although I'm sure full-time immigration lawyers have always had their complaints about the level of independence, I think historically there was some independence, and there were plenty of people who went from being immigration lawyers, representing non-citizens, who would get hired as immigration judges or BIA members. That is, needless to say, not the case right now. And not only that, all of those people have been fired. So now I think it's basically accepted that, the BIA also historically did not publish too many decisions. So most of these cases are resolved in relatively short orders that basically resolve only that person's case. They're not precedent. They don't control future cases. Every now and then the board would get a case where they think, oh, this raises an important legal issue, so we'll publish a decision that will set forth our view of the law that immigration judges are bound to follow, and that the Board of Immigration Appeals is bound to follow unless it changes its mind in another published decision. Now they're cranking out published decisions, and you won't be surprised to hear that they all come out one way. And so, it's really, the agency has become just a total rubber stamp of the
administration policy
of the administration policy. Yeah,
it always seems like they're more aggressive about stuff like that than the other side is. And it's hard not to picture in my mind that the prosecutor has a cowboy hat on, and so does the judge.
Yeah.
And they're both like, exactly what's going to happen before a word is said just by looking at this setup. Again, I mean, to me, AI would be this is a perfect application for AI, because we've seen in the major leagues how they call balls and strikes, and that's basically what a judge is supposed to do, right? And you can see that they're much, I've seen baseball games where 9 calls were overturned by AI. This is not a terrible thing.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting. I mean, there's a lot of decisions in these cases that are very discretionary. So it's sort of do the equities weigh in favor of, like often you have to clear all kinds of eligibility hurdles, but even if once you've cleared all of those, there's sort of an ultimate question of, does this person warrant, do the equities weigh in favor of them being able to stay? And there's a question of, like, is that something you want a computer deciding? I don't know. I'd rather have a computer than some of the current judges, honestly.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, yeah. All things being equal, sure, that probably sounds good. But let's, I'm thinking back to Ray Bradbury, and I'm thinking back to Isaac Asimov. I don't know if I'm really ready to let AI make all these kind of decisions. Come on, let's do it. Listen, David, thank you very, very much. This has been hugely informative. And what I'm going to do is, usually what happens is, especially when we have a guest and the listeners get an opportunity, I get a ton of questions that come in. If possible, we'd like to have you back on, and I will send you those questions, and we can go through them. And because usually that's what happens. We post an episode, and I'll get 100 emails that say, well, you didn't ask this. Well, you didn't ask that. Well, I want to know about this. And we'd love to have you back on. Yeah. And I'll send you those questions and we'll do it. So David Zimmer, and it is Zimmer, Citron, and Clark, right? Did I say that right? And if you're ever in need to go to the Supreme Court, these are the guys. That's right. And remember, if you're from New York or Boston or anywhere else, you got to have a guy. And these are the guys you got to have. David, thank you so very, very much for being on.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
And that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We want to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing team, Apple Podcasts, the largest source of podcast and music online, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your destination for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. And most importantly, we want to thank you, our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society could not be possible. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing on the platform of your choice. It's easy, it's free, and helps our channel grow. For questions or comments, you can reach us at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So on behalf of Dr. Scott Gershwer and all of our production partners here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power of society is knowledge. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next time.